Fear is an enemy we never see, yet it shapes every step we take. It whispers doubts. It tightens the chest. It convinces a strong man that he is weak. In ancient Japan, there was a warrior who walked into battles where death was certain and never once bowed to fear. Miyamoto Musashi, undefeated in over 60 duels, the master of strategy, the architect of a mindset that ordinary men believed belonged only to gods. But Musashi was not born fearless. He carved his strength out of silence. He sharpened his spirit through solitude. He studied the darkness inside his own mind until fear had nowhere left to hide. This is the story of a young warrior who seeks Musashi's teachings, not to become a killer, but to free himself from the invisible chains that hold every man hostage. A journey through ego, hesitation, discomfort, pain, and the quiet liberation that arrives when one learns to move forward without needing certainty. Every lesson here is ancient. Every battle is internal. And every step brings him closer to a truth the modern world has forgotten. Fear cannot be conquered by running away from it. It dissolves only when a warrior walks straight into the fire, breathing slow, grounded in presence, guided by a system that was forged in Musashi's mind. Chapter 1: The Sword of Doubt. Fear rarely announces itself with a roar. For years, these whispers controlled him. His name is Riku, a young man with strong shoulders and a collapsing spirit. He isn't weak, he isn't broken, but every time life demands courage, his chest tightens, his hands shake, and he retreats into a smaller version of himself. He was meant for more, yet he lives as if the world would shatter if he dared to take one bold step. He knows this feeling well, the silent enemy sitting behind his ribs. Every morning, Riku wakes with ambition, and every night he falls asleep with regret because he never acted on it. Day after day, the cycle repeats until he fears one thing more than failure: a life that quietly disappears. One evening, after another opportunity slipped through his fingers, Riku wandered through the outskirts of the city, frustrated, ashamed, exhausted by his own avoidance. The streets were silent, mist rolling low across the stone path. The world felt as if it were holding its breath. That's when he saw him. An old man stood beneath a lone cherry tree, its blossoms out of season, yet one petal drifted down as if guided by fate. The elder's posture was still, too still, like a blade resting in its sheath. His eyes watched Riku with a calm curiosity, as though he could see the battle happening inside him. "You carry the weight of invisible chains," the old man said, his voice a quiet command. Riku froze. He hadn't spoken a word. "Fear leaves marks," the elder interrupted. There was no judgment in his tone, only recognition, the familiarity of someone who had seen this struggle before. The man introduced himself as Kenshin, a swordsman no longer bound to duels or glory, a guardian of a lineage most believed had vanished, a lineage that once trained under the teachings of Miyamoto Musashi. Riku laughed nervously at first, thinking it a story told to impress strangers. But Kenshin's presence felt ancient, like stone that has survived storms, like the ocean hiding its true depth. "You want to change?" Kenshin said. Riku frowned. Kenshin stepped closer, eyes unwavering. "Everyone is a fighter." The words struck like truth finally spoken aloud. Kenshin placed an ordinary wooden practice sword in Riku's hands. Not heavy, not sharp, just solid, enough to remind him he was holding something. "This is not for slashing enemies," Kenshin said. Riku looked down at the blade, but what he truly saw was a choice. For the first time, fear felt exposed, not an unbreakable wall, but a shadow waiting to be confronted. He realized something that sent a pulse through his chest. The battle had never been outside. It was always in the space between thought and action. Kenshin turned away, but not before offering one final lesson. Fear becomes strongest one moment before you step forward. Riku stood alone under the cherry tree, breath unsteady, heart alive. One step forward, that's all the world was asking. And for the first time, he took it. The path of the warrior had begun. Riku returned the next morning, not because he felt brave, but because the fear of staying the same had finally grown heavier than the fear of change. Kenshin was already waiting, seated in stillness, as if he had not moved since the night before. No warm greeting, no smile, only a silent acknowledgement. You came back. Good, Kenshin said. Training began immediately. Not in fighting, not in sword techniques, but in standing. Feet grounded, knees slightly bent, back straight, as if the spine were a spear against the sky. 10 seconds in, Riku's legs trembled. Kenshin's voice was calm, unmoved by his struggle. 20 seconds, the burn intensified. 30 seconds, the mind began to scream. This hurts. Why am I doing this? I can't. Listen, Kenshin said suddenly, as though he heard every thought. That voice, that is fear. Riku clenched his jaw, his legs shook harder. Sweat formed at his temple. The truth hit harder than the pain. Finally, Riku collapsed forward, panting. Shame flooded his mind. He avoided Kenshin's gaze. But there was no anger in the mentor's eyes, only clarity. You lost to yourself, Kenshin knelt beside him. When fear rises, do not negotiate. Riku didn't respond, but the words pierced deeper than any blade. They trained again and again. Each time, Riku failed sooner than he hoped, but later than he expected. And Kenshin noticed every small victory, though he rarely praised them. As the sun lowered into a wash of amber clouds, Kenshin handed Riku the wooden sword once more. Draw the blade in one motion, he instructed. Riku hesitated. Even here, even now. That brief pause, that tiny stutter in motion. Kenshin tapped the top of Riku's wrist with 2 fingers. No pain, but a shock to his awareness. There, he said. Riku exhaled slowly. Then, motion. The blade rose with a whisper of air. Not perfect, but committed. Kenshin nodded once, the closest thing to praise Riku had earned. You see, every man holds 2 swords, the mentor said, one in his hand and one in his mind. Night thickened around them. The moon climbed silently above the cherry tree. Riku bowed slightly, not out of tradition, but respect for the part of himself he discovered today. Riku walked home different. His legs ached, his arms felt weak, but his spirit, for the first time in years, it felt like it had taken a breath. He realized a truth so simple it almost made him laugh. The first step toward strength is refusing to step back. He didn't know everything yet, but he knew this: he would return. Chapter 2: Silence Cuts Deeper. Silence is uncomfortable for those who have spent their lives running from their own thoughts. Riku returned at dawn. The air was cool, breath turning into faint clouds. The world hadn't fully awakened, and neither had his fear. Kenshin stood at the center of an open dojo, its wooden floor polished by years of disciplined footsteps. No music, no noise, just the hollow quiet of a place built for inner battles. Today, there would be no stance training, no movement, just stillness. Kenshin pointed to a cushion placed in the center of the room. Sit, he said. Riku obeyed, confused but curious. His mentor knelt opposite him. Close your eyes. That sounded simple enough, until Riku tried. His mind, usually dull with distraction, suddenly became viciously awake. Did I lock my door? What time is it? Am I breathing too loud? This is stupid. Riku's eyes snapped open. The sword is useless if the mind trembles, Kenshin continued. Silence reveals your enemy. Riku shut his eyes again, reluctantly, and tried once more. Seconds stretched. Thoughts attacked like arrows from every direction. Worries, memories, insecurities. The mind, desperate to avoid discomfort, began inventing reasons to quit. His legs prickled with numbness. His back itched. His heart beat too loud. Every sensation demanded attention, demanded surrender. Do not respond, Kenshin instructed quietly. Let discomfort scream. The command sounded impossible. Yet something deep inside Riku wanted to prove that he wasn't controlled by the noise within. Minutes passed like hours. Then, something shifted. The thoughts didn't stop, but they softened. They floated by like leaves carried downstream. The itch faded. The tension eased. For a brief moment, there was peace. A peace he hadn't felt since childhood, when the world was simple and fear had no language. When Riku opened his eyes, he expected Kenshin to praise him. Instead, the mentor shook his head slightly. He leaned forward. That moment was not peace. Riku frowned, confused. The mind quieted not because you commanded it, Kenshin explained, but because it became tired of attacking you. Riku nodded slowly. He understood now. Silence wasn't the goal. It was the training ground. Kenshin stood, motioning for Riku to follow him outside, to the edge of a narrow cliff overlooking a rushing river below. The wind roared, water crashed against rock, nature's voice booming with primal intensity. Quiet? Kenshin asked. Yes, Riku answered. Riku placed a hand on his chest, his breath steady. For the first time, he was aware of two worlds. The outer noise, beyond his control. The inner presence, his to command. That quiet is your true weapon, Kenshin said. When fear rises, return to it. Riku stared at the river below, wild, relentless, unstoppable. He suddenly wondered whether silence was not softness, but strength without violence. A warrior is not the one who always fights. That night, Riku closed his eyes and noticed something new. Fear was still there, but it wasn't leading anymore. The next morning brought a different kind of test. Kenshin led Riku into a small courtyard behind the dojo. It was simple, a circle of stones, a single mat in the center, and a bamboo water fountain dripping in slow rhythm. No sword, no stance, no physical strain. Only silence. Sit, Kenshin commanded again. Riku lowered himself onto the mat. The world greeted him immediately. A breeze pushing through bamboo leaves. The distant chatter of birds. Water. Drip, drip, drip. At first, these sounds felt calming, but soon they became distractions, sharp enough to pull his attention away from his breath. His eyes darted around, trying to track every movement. Kenshin noticed. The mind seeks what it fears to lose, he said. Riku swallowed hard. He didn't want to admit how desperately he tried to control everything, his image, his mistakes, his future. The mentor stepped behind him, voice like a low drum. You cannot control the world. Riku inhaled slowly. The bamboo leaves rustled again, but this time he didn't react. Another breath. Another drip of water. They passed without pulling him away. Kenshin observed silently, then finally spoke. Good. Riku didn't turn to look. He didn't want to break this fragile connection to stillness. But Kenshin wasn't done. The words triggered something immediate, a surge of worry rising from his stomach to his throat. Fear didn't need an invitation. It was always close. The thoughts were loud, but Riku did something he had never done before. He didn't fight them. He watched them, like clouds drifting past a mountain that refused to move. Fear is invisible, but its effects are undeniable. Riku breathed deeper. The fear remained, but it shifted. It no longer felt like an enemy grabbing his throat, more like a nervous child tugging at his sleeve. A calm settled. Not perfect, not total, but real. Kenshin placed a hand on Riku's shoulder. "You have begun," the mentor said. "Most men live entire lives running from their own mind." Riku opened his eyes slowly, and the world looked clearer, colors sharper, air cleaner, thoughts quieter. He felt taller, not in height, but in presence. Riku rose to his feet with a quiet confidence, a flame ignited but not yet roaring. He didn't fear silence anymore. He understood it, because silence was not emptiness, it was focus. Chapter 3: The Spirit That Does Not Break. Stillness sharpens awareness, but strength is forged in motion. Riku stood before Kenshin at sunrise, the wooden sword once again in his grip. Today, the training would not be gentle. The air itself felt heavier, as if warning him that comfort would not be tolerated here. Kenshin walked to a wooden rack and pulled down a long bamboo staff, thick, worn by years of relentless strikes. Without delay, Kenshin struck. Not at full power, but fast enough to sting. Riku barely lifted his sword in time. The block sent a shock through his arms. Again, Kenshin ordered. Strike, block, pain. Strike, block, late, more pain. Riku tried to breathe through the discomfort, but his chest tightened. Fear began to creep in again, the fear of failing in front of someone he wanted to impress, the fear of being exposed as weak. Kenshin sensed the hesitation instantly. "You fear the pain," he said, "but pain is not the enemy." Before Riku could react, another strike. This one hit his shoulder cleanly. He grunted and dropped to one knee. The old warrior leaned down, voice hard but steady. "When you run from pain, you strengthen fear." Riku swallowed the burn in his throat and stood again. He wasn't used to this, being pushed past his limit instead of protected from it. His entire life, he had sought comfort, rationalized weakness, and convinced himself that avoiding struggle meant avoiding suffering. But here, suffering had purpose. Strike, block, strike, block, barely. Each movement became a negotiation between quitting and continuing. And with every choice to stay in the fight, the negotiation shortened. The pain didn't shrink, his fear of it did. Hours passed. Sweat soaked his clothes. Arms trembling, fingers numb, breath ragged. Kenshin finally stopped attacking. Riku could feel his heartbeat in every muscle. "You endured," Kenshin said plainly. Riku expected praise, maybe admiration, but Kenshin wasn't finished. Riku blinked. Before he could ask another question, Kenshin pointed toward a steep hill leading into the forest. So, Riku ran. Up the hill, legs screaming. Past the trees, lungs burning. Down the other side, stumbling on uneven ground. Every instinct begged him to stop, to lie down, to quit, to return to the version of himself who chose ease. But that man was dying here, and something stronger was taking his place. Riku reached the top of the ridge. He gasped for breath, vision blurred by sweat. His body wanted collapse, but something inside refused. He stood tall, trembling, exhausted, but standing. That moment, no one could steal. He made his way back down. Kenshin waited, arms folded. Riku stared at him, stunned. Kenshin smiled faintly. That was the warm-up. Riku felt tears burning behind his eyes. Not from pain, from pride. He didn't break. He wouldn't break. Riku's legs shook as if the earth beneath him carried a pulse. His lungs scraped for air. Sweat stung his eyes. And yet, he stayed upright. Kenshin observed him, not with softness, but with certainty. The look of a man who has seen many transformations and knows precisely when the spirit has begun to awaken. "Fatigue strips away illusion," Kenshin said as he approached. He lifted the bamboo staff again. Riku's instinct screamed, "Not again! Not now! I'm done!" But Kenshin struck, and Riku blocked. Sloppy, slow, but deliberate. "Good," Kenshin said. "When strength is gone, technique is gone. Strike, block, pain, movement." Riku's body operated on something deeper than muscle, a quiet force that refused collapse. For the first time, he understood. The spirit is not energy. It is decision. Kenshin lowered his staff and pointed at the ground. Riku nearly collapsed willingly, but Kenshin wasn't giving a break. "Push-ups," he commanded, "until failure." Riku lowered himself, arms trembling violently, and pressed up. Then again, and again. At 20, his elbows nearly buckled. At 22, his breath broke into gasps. At 24, he couldn't rise. His face hovered an inch from the earth, veins burning under his skin. Everything inside screamed surrender. "Do not negotiate," Kenshin warned. Riku let out a raw, shaking growl and pushed once more. 1 inch, another inch. His arms trembled like branches in a storm. He rose. Kenshin did not applaud. He did not smile. He simply said, "There." Riku collapsed back to the ground, but he was smiling through the pain. Not because training was over, because he now knew. He had a spirit, and it bent, but did not break. Later, as dusk pulled shadows across the dojo, Kenshin brought Riku back to the cherry tree, the same place they first crossed paths. "The world praises comfort," Kenshin said. "It sells shortcuts, promises success without suffering. But there is no wisdom in the easy path, no strength." Riku listened, chest still rising and falling with exhaustion. "A warrior does not seek pain," Kenshin continued, "but he does not flee from it. Pain is proof." Riku looked at his trembling hands. Yesterday, he believed fear controlled him. Today, fear was being outvoted. Kenshin pressed the wooden sword back into his palm. "Return tomorrow," he said. "Stronger or weaker, it does not matter." As Riku walked home under the bleeding colors of sunset, a quiet pride rose in his chest. Strength wasn't an image. It wasn't applause. It wasn't the absence of fear or pain. Strength was continuing. And the breeze carried the promise forward. Chapter 4. Killing the Ego Before It Kills You. With every day of training, Riku's confidence grew teeth. He stood taller, he spoke clearer, he felt stronger. And strength, when unfamiliar, can be mistaken for superiority. One morning, Riku arrived at the dojo ahead of Kenshin, eager to prove he no longer needed guidance. He gripped the wooden sword with pride, swinging it through the air with sharp confidence, imagining his movements were already those of a master. When Kenshin entered, Riku didn't bow. He attacked the empty space with exaggerated strikes, rapid, forceful, loud. The sound of the blade slicing wind filled the room. Riku waited for praise. Instead, Kenshin walked past him without a word. Kenshin paused, turned. His eyes were colder than Riku had ever seen. "You believe strength is loud," Kenshin said quietly. He stepped forward, closer, closer, until their faces were inches apart. Riku's chest tightened. "Ego," Kenshin continued, "is fear in disguise. Fear of being seen as less. Fear of losing status." He swept Riku's sword aside effortlessly with just 2 fingers, exposing his unguarded center. Riku lowered his gaze, anger and shame twisting inside him. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to argue, but Kenshin wasn't finished. He handed Riku a broom, long, wooden, covered in dust. Riku stared at the broom, insult boiling behind his sternum. Kenshin nodded once. Riku's voice hardened. Prune. He pointed at the floor. Riku's fists clenched around the broom. His ego screamed insults at Kenshin. It screamed that he deserved better. It screamed that the training had become beneath him. Yet, beneath the irritation, something uncomfortably true was forming. He wanted to look powerful more than he wanted to become powerful. With silent frustration, Riku began sweeping. Every stroke of the broom was a battle against his own pride. Every corner he cleaned forced him to confront the version of himself who demanded recognition. Hours passed, the day warmed, sweat dripped from his chin, not from combat this time, but from humility. When Riku finally finished, he set the broom aside and stood before Kenshin, breathing hard. Riku remained silent, but Kenshin smiled. Riku bowed for the first time, not out of obedience, but respect. And in that bow, his ego cracked. Just a little, but enough. By evening, the dojo floor reflected a quiet shine. The scent of fresh wood and humility hung in the air. Riku's arms were tired, his back ached, but a far heavier weight had been lifted from him, the illusion of superiority. Kenshin motioned for him to follow. They walked to a small garden behind the temple, lanterns glowing softly, koi gliding beneath the surface of a still pond. Kenshin sat on a stone bench and gestured for Riku to kneel opposite him. Ego appears when strength outpaces wisdom, Kenshin began. He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the pond, ripples expanding outward, distorting the reflection of the moon. He pointed to the still water beyond the ripples. True mastery is when nothing disturbs the surface. No pride, no desperation. Riku looked down, breathing slowly. The calmness of the garden seeped into him. "I only wanted you to notice my progress," he finally admitted. Kenshin nodded. "That is natural. But admiration is a poor foundation for greatness. When the world does not applaud, the ego feels wounded." Riku listened closely, absorbing every word. He placed a hand against his own chest. Something inside Riku shifted, a realization that the training wasn't only testing his strength, but his identity. Kenshin stood and retrieved 2 wooden swords from a nearby rack. They took their positions, Riku alert, grounded, aware. Kenshin attacked without warning. But this time, Riku did not chase victory. He did not rush. He did not swing wildly to appear impressive. He moved with intention, silent, present, focused only on the moment, not the outcome. Their blades met, tap, slide, redirect. The sound was minimal, precise. Kenshin smiled faintly. Riku lowered his sword, sweat dripping softly. Kenshin nodded with acceptance. As the night embraced the garden, Kenshin delivered a final lesson. Strength without humility becomes corruption. Humility without strength becomes weakness. Riku bowed deeply, not as a student desperate to be seen, but as a warrior in the making, grateful for the shadows being stripped away. He walked home slow, at peace with the silence between his steps. The ego had not been slain, but it no longer commanded him. Chapter 5: The Enemy Within, Part 1. Strength had awakened in Riku. Humility had grounded him. Silence had sharpened his awareness. But Kenshin knew there was still a battle Riku had not fought, one that every warrior fears more than blades or enemies: the battle against the shadow inside. At dawn, Kenshin led Riku deep into the mountain forest. Cold air wrapped around them like a warning. The path narrowed, roots twisting underfoot like the gripping hands of doubt. Riku's heartbeat quickened. He handed Riku the wooden sword. Riku looked around, confusion rising. Kenshin's gaze pierced him. The exercise began in total silence. Not the peaceful quiet Riku once learned, but a heavy stillness that held every fear suspended in the air. No movement, Kenshin instructed. Just Riku and his thoughts. Minutes passed. Then thoughts turned to accusations. You're still not enough. Your victories are small and forgettable. One failure and it will all fall apart. Everyone can see you're pretending. The insults hit harder than Kenshin's staff ever did. Riku clenched his fists, digging nails into his palm. But the voice continued, sharper now, relentless. You will always be afraid. You will always break. You are weak. Riku stepped backward, instinctively retreating from a threat that had no face. Kenshin slammed his staff into the earth, breaking the moment like thunder. Commanded. Riku's breath shook. He forced his feet still. Kenshin approached slowly. He pointed at Riku's chest. The enemy is here. Riku swallowed hard, tears pressing behind his eyes. He asked. Kenshin did not soften his voice. You do not defeat it, he said. The wind kicked up dust, and in Riku's mind, the shadow finally revealed itself. A darker reflection of him. Eyes full of doubt, posture collapsed by insecurity. The version of himself that always chose the lesser path. The coward he once accepted as his identity. The shadow stepped closer, whispering every memory of shame, every failure he tried to bury. His hands trembled, breath rapid, heart pounding. Riku hesitated, the pause fear always lived in.
Riku drew his blade upward with a shout that ripped from the deepest part of him, the part tired of being controlled. He roared through the fear, through the doubt, through the shadow. The sword did not hit anything physical, but the mental weight shattered. His knees nearly buckled, but he stayed standing. Chest heaving, eyes burning. He had not destroyed the shadow, but he had proven it could not break him. Kenshin nodded in solemn approval. You faced the enemy within, he said. Riku gripped his sword, breathing through the last tremor of fear. The battle wasn't over, but victory no longer felt impossible. Night fell like a curtain drawn tight across the sky. Riku sat alone in the clearing, the wooden post still looming before him, the silent witness to his struggle. The chill of darkness seeped into his skin, but something warm pulsed inside him. Defiance. He had stood his ground today. He had not surrendered. But Kenshin had not allowed celebration. Instead, he had left Riku with a final directive. Do not run from your shadow. So Riku remained, his thoughts no longer crashing like waves, but circling him like wolves waiting for weakness. The forest whispered around him. Branches creaked. A distant owl cried out. Leaves rustled like hidden footsteps. Fear tried to return, slipping into his mind like smoke. What if you are not as strong as you pretend? What if tomorrow reveals your limits? What if today was the best you will ever be? Riku tightened his grip on the wooden sword. He inhaled deeply, remembering the lessons of silence. Fear did not vanish, but he watched it rise, watched it coil, watched it try to pull him down, and he did not move. Hours later, Kenshin returned, his presence arriving without sound, like a moon appearing from behind clouds. He sat beside Riku, gaze directed toward the still dark horizon. He turned his head slightly. Riku looked at his mentor, surprised by the touch of pride in his voice. Kenshin continued, "You must understand this truth. Courage does not silence fear, it commands it." He pointed at the wooden post. "That post is not your enemy. Your thoughts are not your enemy." He rested his hand over his heart. Riku exhaled slowly, sure that this time he understood. They stood, the moonlight painting silver edges around their figures. Kenshin guided Riku through controlled sword movements, slow, grounded, precise. Each strike was paired with a breath.
Each breath with intention. With every motion, Riku realized something profound. The shadow in his mind mirrored his posture. When he struggled, it towered. When he stood tall, it shrank. Fear had never been an enemy to eliminate. It was a boundary to cross, a voice to challenge, a force to sharpen his resolve. Pain made him stronger. Silence made him aware. Humility made him clear. But fear made him awake. Riku lowered his sword with a steady hand. The night no longer felt hostile, only deep, wide, and full of possibility. Tomorrow, he would continue walking into the unknown, not without fear, but ahead of it. Chapter 6: Walking Forward Without Guarantees. Morning rose in a blaze of amber light, washing the world in a warmth that Riku could finally feel without dread. The fear was still present, a quiet whisper in the background, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of his breath. Kenshin led Riku to the highest cliff overlooking the valley. Below them, the river coiled like a silver serpent, slicing through the land, relentless and unbothered by obstacles. Riku stood taller, wooden sword resting against his side, waiting. Most men plan their steps to avoid uncertainty. Kenshin spoke, his voice calm as the wind. He looked directly at Riku. "You seek guarantees. You seek proof that the path will reward your effort, that your strength will always hold." Riku felt exposed because he knew those desires well. Kenshin continued, "But life offers no guarantees. It only offers moments." He stepped closer, eyes sharp with truth. "Do you think I trained you to eliminate fear? No." Riku's chest tightened, not in anxiety, but in realization. Every lesson, every trial, every bruise had led here, walking forward without knowing what comes next. Kenshin placed a blindfold into Riku's hands. Riku obeyed. Darkness swallowed the world. Kenshin guided him a few paces forward, then withdrew his touch. Riku's heart pounded, but not from panic. He listened. The breeze brushed one cheek more than the other. Direction. The sound of distant bamboo. Location. His heartbeat, anchor. He took one step, then another. Not perfect, not confident, but committed. Each step said, "I trust myself. I move anyway." He stumbled once, fear surged, but he steadied himself and continued. Kenshin's voice reached him from the darkness. "Presence is your vision. Do not wait for the path to appear." Riku kept moving until his hand touched fabric, Kenshin's cloak. He removed the blindfold, breath shaking with relief. Kenshin nodded once, expression unreadable. They returned to the dojo one final time. Kenshin placed the wooden sword into Riku's hands, but this time the gesture felt ceremonial. "You came seeking strength," Kenshin said. He touched Riku's chest lightly. His palm pressed just over the heart. Presence, humility, stillness, spirit. He stepped back. Riku bowed deeply, not to a master, but to the man who helped him master himself. At the cherry tree where they first met, Kenshin delivered the last words of the journey. "You are ready." Riku felt tears gather, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming clarity of finally knowing who he is. Kenshin pointed toward the road leading out of the mountains. "Now go." Riku tightened his grip on the wooden sword, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of everything he has become. He turned toward the unknown, and he walked forward, without guarantees, without hesitation, without surrender. Riku walked the mountain path alone, boots pressing into dirt that carried the footprints of centuries of warriors before him. The air was crisp. The world felt bigger than it ever had, and so did he. Fear followed quietly, like a shadow, like a companion. But Riku did not look back. Because he no longer feared its presence, he respected it. As he descended from the mountains, memories flashed in rhythm with each step. The trembling legs of Chapter 3, choosing to endure. The broom in his hands, Chapter 4's humility. The shadow self whispering failure, Chapter 5's confrontation. And that blindfolded walk, Chapter 6's lesson in trust. He realized something profound. His transformation was not a single moment, but a series of decisions made when quitting felt easier. Every doubt he defeated still lived inside him, just quieter now, without authority. This is what Kenshin meant. Strength is a spirit that keeps going. Near the base of the trail, Riku encountered a young boy trying to split firewood with a blunt axe. Every swing failed. Fear of embarrassment flooded his eyes, the same fear Riku once knew. Riku approached, calm and steady. "Here," he said, guiding the boy's grip. "Don't fight the wood." The boy swung again. Crack, a clean break. His surprise turned to pride, the first spark of self-belief. Riku smiled. In that moment, he understood the final pillar of Musashi's system. A warrior becomes complete when his strength helps others rise. By sunset, Riku reached the edge of his village. The same streets that once witnessed his hesitation now welcomed a man who had learned to act in spite of it. Neighbors noticed something different in his gaze. Focus without force, calm without weakness, confidence without boasting. He stepped through his home's wooden doorway, and the silence inside no longer felt empty. It felt full. He set the wooden sword on the floor, but its lessons remained in him. The sword of the hand, strength. The sword of the mind, presence. And now, the sword of the heart, purpose. He took a long breath, not to brace himself against fear, but to greet the future ahead. Because he finally understood, fear doesn't disappear, it evolves, and so must we. Riku's life from this moment forward would not be decided by comfort, but by courage. He whispered to himself, a vow carved into the air. I will walk forward. No applause, no certainty, no guarantee of victory. Only a warrior's promise. I will not stop. Core moral. A warrior is not the one who eliminates fear, but the one who continues moving even when fear walks beside him.